Hi everyone, I'm Jermaine and this is the Xiaomi Redmi Note 9T. Now this is of course an entry phone and a lot of people will be wondering what the camera performance on a device like this is. Of course it's not gonna compare with a mid-range or a high-end phone especially. So we're gonna see how this one actually performs in daytime shots but also in low light shots and see where it does something well or not so well. Either way, let's dive into this camera and see how the experience is on the Xiaomi Redmi Note 9T. But before we start talking about the result and seeing how the camera performs, let's talk about the hardware. Now the main sensor is a 48 megapixel sensor with a 1/2 inch sensor size and it has a 1.8, well technically a 1.79 aperture. We have a 2 megapixel depth sensor and of course a 2 megapixel micro sensor. So let's start with this first shot, and I feel like this is a good test of the dynamic range on the phone. Now you can see that between the characters there's quite a bit of shadow. For myself, well, I still think this shot is pleasing and it was very color accurate. You can still see that the dynamic range isn't the best out there, but we are talking about an entry phone. Overall though, again like I said, the shot is pleasing and there isn't much difference between the 12 megapixel resolution and the 48 megapixel resolution. Overall though, with the 48 megapixel resolution, you can of course crop in quite a bit. And then we get to this next shot. Now this is the same building but just from a different angle, looking at the sky itself but also seeing how much detail it captures. Again though, here details are fine, it looks quite pleasing, the shot is really nice and it just looks like a proper composition overall. I really like this shot, I really have nothing to say about it. And colors again are quite accurate to what I was seeing right there. Now for this third shot we have this weird structure in our city. I don't know what it is, don't ask me, but I think the shot overall just looks again really solid. And again, what I really want to drive home is that colors are quite accurate to what I'm seeing here. Overall the shot again is quite pleasing. Although if I would say something, maybe the building on the back, the church, is a little bit washed out, but that's about it honestly. Now in this next shot, I find it fun that between the 12 megapixel shot and of course the 48 megapixel shot, we haven't seen much difference. However, in this shot you can see that the 48 megapixel shot is a little bit warmer than what it really was. You can see it's a little bit yellow and the normal 12 megapixel shot is a little bit more accurate to what I was seeing. Overall though, still a good shot. And it has plenty of detail, and with the 48 megapixel resolution shot you can of course crop in if you want to. Now funny enough, here the walls are reversed in this shot. You can see that the focus theater is now a bit warmer with the 12 megapixel resolution shot than the 48 megapixel. Overall the 48 megapixel resolution shot probably is a little bit cooler than it really was, and the 12 megapixel resolution shot is a bit more accurate to what I was seeing. Again though, plenty of information and plenty of detail in the shot itself. I really don't have anything to complain about either of these shots. So far in daytime this phone really does pretty well for the camera. Here again I really like a shot like this because again you can see how the dynamic range is on a camera like this. You can see for instance that the face details aren't there as much as it should be, but overall though again the shot is quite pleasing, but again dynamic range is something where this slightly struggles. However, the clouds on the rear are still quite visible, so overall I still think this is a good shot. Well, in daytime I just want to say that for myself I feel like the experience with the camera is pretty solid. Colors are pretty accurate, but you do notice sometimes there's a slight color difference between the 12 megapixel resolution shot and of course your 48 megapixel resolution shot. Overall though, they're still pretty close to each other when it comes to the details in the shot itself, the dynamic range. However, it's just the warmth of the tone that can have some difference in between the two shots. Now some of these shots are shot with a setting sun, so slowly the sun was setting down and you can see that in the shots itself as well. It creates some awesome reflections in some shots. However, what I did notice is that because of that, details become to go down a little bit. It's not much, but you can tell a little bit, and softness is also rising up a little bit more. Now what I really like about this shot for instance is the reflection that it creates in the balls itself, but also the clouds are really visible, the detail on the building is quite visible, dynamic range is quite alright, I don't really have issues with it, and it really captures the shot how I was seeing it. Anyway, let me now be quiet and just show you some shots and experience it for yourself. I just wanted to bring home some things that I noticed while using the camera.
I did some things but I wasn't clear, no, I did did it right. Yeah, that's what you said when you started the fight. We came to an end, I put up this fence. But do you really mean that this is the end? 1, 2, 3 years of silence. Then 4, 5, 6, still nothing. When my hair gets green, I lose my shape. I'd still be missing you. Year by year, out of silence. No, I hope this is a phase that you were just dramatic. That we still could be good, that our love is elastic. I'll make this right if you give me a chance. Oh, I did it wrong and you did it right. Yeah, that's what you said when you started the fight. We came to an end, I put up this fence. But do you really mean that this is the end? 1, 2, 3 years of silence. Then 4, 5, 6, still nothing. When my hair gets green, I lose my shape. I'd still be missing you. Year by year, out of silence. No, in my plan, just you. In my there, in yours too. In my plan, just you, just you. I did it wrong and you did it right. Yeah, that's what.
4K, 30 frames per second. (1080p), 60 frames per second. (1080p), 30 frames per second. And then of course we go to low light shots. Now I'm gonna showcase some shots where it performs quite well. However, in low light it clearly isn't at the top end when it comes to these entry kind of phones. I've seen better, but I also seen much worse. So it isn't the greatest out there, but it isn't the worst either. Either way, shots using night mode can look quite pale. The sky looks weird. It just doesn't reflect that well when it comes to these shots. What does help though is if you don't use night mode, which is a weird one. But if you don't use night mode, colors are better and the overall shot just looks more pleasing. The sky doesn't do the trippy thing that night mode can actually create here. But what you can tell is of course that the dynamic range isn't as good. You can see, for instance, in this one, you can see inside the building quite properly. However, with the normal mode and then just AI on, you can see that it is struggling with the light inside this building. Overall though, if I would advise you something is, again, I wouldn't use night mode for this phone. I would just use your normal shot and then have AI on. It will result in pictures that overall look more pleasing and give you a better result and don't look as pale, because a lot of colors are removed for some reason when you use night mode. And not to mention, of course, the sky can do some trippy things when you use night mode. Something that honestly makes those low light shots not worth it. I would say don't use night mode at all on this phone when it comes to really low light situations. If you don't really have low light situations like I recorded right here, night mode actually works quite properly, as you've seen from some previous shots that I showcased. Right there, night mode actually worked properly and it did balance the picture out pretty well. And of course use some video shots in low light as well. You can clearly see, for instance, that the 1080p and 60 frames per second is really struggling to get some light in. But overall the shots are really soft in video recording in low light as well. So at the end, I think that the Xiaomi Redmi Note 9T is a decent performer. In daytime, I think that it really reflects the colors pretty well. And I don't see any oversaturation when it comes to the greens, which is something that I personally dislike when it comes to a camera. When it makes greens far too green, the saturation just bumped up like crazy. Overall though, I think daytime performance is pretty solid for a price like this. However, in low light, I have experienced that the camera isn't that great. It's still not, terrible by any means. It just isn't like on the top level when it comes to an entry phone. but I still think it's decent, especially for the price that you are paying for a device like this. Mostly though, I find it odd that working with night mode simply doesn't perform that well, and I wouldn't advise it. Just turn on the camera and use AI instead of night performance, because clearly you get better pictures, even though it has better dynamic range. When it comes to the night mode, the overall picture just doesn't look as pleasing. It has trouble getting those colors really well. Either way, let me know what you think about the camera experience of the device itself, and hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you did, good. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, hit like, because that really helps out with a YouTube video, and of course, talk to you guys in the next